Good evening, everyone. My name is Maggie, and on behalf of Book Soup, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for our virtual event celebrating Bob Crewe, sight and sound, compositions of art and music. We're so excited and grateful that our bookstore can continue to bring authors and their works to our community during this time. We'll be hosting virtual events in the near future, which you can learn about on our website, booksoup.com, as well as our social media at BookSoup. Our next event is tomorrow, April 10th, where Book Soup and the Troubadour will present Ricky Lee Jones in conversation with Chris Doritas, discussing Last Chance Texaco, Chronicles of an American Troubadour. To submit a question during the event, please use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. If you see a question on the list you'd like our speakers to answer, please click the like button. We'll try to answer as many questions as time will allow. Please do not use the sidebar chat to ask a question. Also, support our bookstore and our authors by purchasing a copy of tonight's featured book. Just click on the green purchase button that reads Bob Crewe directly below the viewer screen. The link will redirect you to our website where you can continue your checkout process. We're selling digital audiobooks and ebooks through Libro.fm and Kobo for those who are interested. And without further ado, I'm going to turn the camera over to our guests. Enjoy the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Maggie. I'm Jessica May, and I want to thank Maggie and Book Soup for inviting us and welcoming us and being so gracious with technical support this past week. About 3 years ago, I was working as the chief curator at the Portland Museum of Art, where I am here in Maine, and I had a conversation with Dan Crewe, who's also here with us tonight, and Dan suggested that I might want to look at the art of his brother, Bob. And the suggestion itself made my jaw drop for several reasons, but this is the genesis of the story of how we come as a group to be here tonight. I know the legacy of Bob Crewe as a singer and a songwriter, a music producer, and an integral part of the American songbook of the 20th century. Like nearly every American teenager in the post-war period, I grew up singing Big Girls Don't Cry in the bedroom mirror at night. And I also knew Crewe from his extraordinary run of hits with the Four Seasons, as well as Lady Marmalade, and from the Broadway show Jersey Boys, where he was portrayed and discussed in an illuminating article today in Variety magazine. I urge you to check it out for one of my esteemed panelists. What I didn't know is that Bob was a visual artist really throughout his life and one of uncommon depth. And I'm going to stop here and encourage you all to take a look at the link that's on the screen because that gives you access to his website and information about his actual works. The result of that conversation in intervening years is the conversation you'll hear tonight. In addition to his work as the CEO and chairman of the Crewe Foundation, an extraordinary philanthropic organization that supports a range of initiatives that focused on LGBTQ rights, youth, and the fine arts in Maine, Dan has edited this recently published volume that we're celebrating tonight called Bob Crewe, Sight and Sound, and has created a template for us to understand the legacy of Bob Crewe as extending beyond his role as a musician to encompass the wild and rare dualism of an artist who found two creative languages, music and art. Crewe was born in Newark, New Jersey in 1930. He attended for a short period of time Parsons School of Design, where he aspired to become an architect. He left after a year in order to travel in Europe and discovered art through that classic education known as walking around museums until your feet fall off. His modeling, singing, and songwriting career took off in New York in the 1950s, and he was also making art during this time and developed a friendship with Andy Warhol, who in 1960 helped him get a show at Bowley Gallery in New York, which was quite a prestigious venue. By early was doing really well in terms of his singing and songwriting and music production career, and making art somewhat took a back seat until an important moment in his life in the 1980s that Dan will share with us, when he was living in Los Angeles and really dedicated himself full-time for a good chunk of the 1990s to making fine art, much of which is showcased in the book that we're looking at. So we are going to talk about this amazing legacy of an artist who was so proficient in so brilliant really, in two different entirely different media and creative languages. And I have tonight with me a team of sort of extraordinary panelists who I want to welcome to the virtual stage. So first, Dan Crewe, as I said, CEO, chairman of the Crewe Foundation, who for 3 decades worked as a producer and manager in the music industry, among many other careers, including with Bob. I'm also eager to welcome Stephen Gatos, a journalist and executive VP of content for Variety magazine, and who has just, as I said, published a piece on Bob Crewe for the magazine. I'm also delighted to welcome my fellow essayists and friends, Peter Boggins and Donald Albrecht. Peter is a celebrated painter and art critic who served as chief critic for Newsweek magazine, as well as more recently has written for the Wall Street Journal and Art Forum. And by sheer coincidence, Peter was previously represented by the same gallery as Bob Crewe in Los Angeles, the Jan Baum Gallery, which I think shows just what a small universe the art world can be sometimes. Donald is a writer and independent curator who is known for his investigations of American art and culture, and who has organized exhibition projects for the Library of Congress, Museum of the City of New York, and the New York Public Library, among other spots. So I'm delighted to welcome the team, and I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. If you have questions, I'll be fielding them. We're going to turn it over first to Steve, then to Dan, then to Peter, then to Donald for just short introductions, and then we'll have a conversation and welcome your questions. Off to you, Steve.
Hi, I'm just delighted and honored to be here. I just give you a little background of what drew me into this, the world of this project and the world of Bob Crewe. Many years ago, I met someone who was very connected to a huge part of my youth. It was a man named Andrew Loog Oldham, who has participated in this project. Andrew was the legendary first manager of the Rolling Stones, and someone who knew Bob Crewe quite well, and quite a stellar figure. So in meeting Andrew, which is very exciting, in the course of that day years ago, he had mentioned how angry he was about the play Jersey Boys and how it treated Bob Crewe. Being the age I am and being a sponge of American culture and music and mid-century pop music, I remembered the name, Bob Crewe kind of vaguely, the Bob Crewe generation, and didn't really think about it much, but it didn't leave my mind because he made an impact on me. His anger made an impact on me, that he felt someone that was very special had been portrayed in a way that was journalistically wrong. That was one part of it. He felt it was not accurate, but he felt it was demeaning, and it demeaned and reduced the contribution of Bob Crewe to the story of the Four Seasons and Jersey Boys. So that never left my thinking. It was somewhere floating around in the background. And that's what drew me into this. When it came back around and someone said to me, would you be interested in looking at this book and getting into the story, I found myself drawn back in. And as one of 4 brothers, I can only say Bob Crewe is lucky to have a brother like Dan, because Dan, you are a keeper of the legacy. Your recollections and your insights and your honesty, and clearly your love for your brother, but I think your clear-headedness about all of it is just remarkable. So it gave me a chance to get into this, to be part of this today, but also to write the piece I wrote, which is to say, isn't it interesting that when we talk about homophobia and we talk about prejudice, we're not talking about something in the dinosaur days of our culture back in the 1890s or the 1920s or the 50s or whatever. Jersey Boys came out this century. It's 2005. The idea that you could get away with, the comic relief for the play is all this kind of mincing, campy character, and it would be very hard to rewrite the play because you'd have to figure out where to put the laugh lines, because they seem to rely on Bob Crewe so much. So that's by way of an introduction to my road back in. The other thing I should say, and burying the lead, as we say in journalism, the songwriting, the world of the great songwriters and songcraft is to me a danger in danger of being a lost art. I don't think anyone is paying attention to songcraft of the kind, the caliber. Dan had said to me that his brother created vignettes. And when you look into every one of those hits, you discover the lapidary work, the precision of the storytelling, the use of the images and the relationships and the drama and the crescendo and the tension and everything. Every one of them is a little tale in itself. So I'm a great student and fan of people who know how to write a song and do it well. And I think that Mr. Crewe did it uncommonly well.
Well, let me say, first of all, I have to say to Stephen that I read your article today, and I've been sending it to everybody, and I've been getting all kinds of wonderful responses. I said, well, why don't you write to Steve? I want to tell you, first of all, Andrew Loog Oldham, who is one of my very dearest and longest friends in the music industry, sent me your article early this morning. I don't know what time he got up in and one of my first emails was the web, the link to your article, which was wonderful. And I want to say thank you so much for an incredible explanation of what you interpreted to be my brother and the story about my brother. So thank you so much. This book, and by the way, while we're here, we're to talk about a book which I in my life never thought I would be doing. It was the last thing I would have normally wanted to do, and I did do it, kicking and screaming and complaining, and but I will say that if it weren't for the team that wound up collectively becoming the real messengers in the book, I would have gone nuts trying to make sense out of my brother's story, because my brother was, if there's no word that really truly does him justice, and I think this is what ultimately makes the book exciting and interesting. But most importantly, for somebody who lived every bit of his life in my life, I'm 4 years younger than he, so he was always in my life, in one way or the other. Not always pleasant, because he was my older brother when I was a very young kid. But ironically, I wound up being the older brother in many respects of how we interrelated as adults. Bob was a phenomenon. There's no two ways about it. I mean, one of the things about him is he never failed to surprise, but he was always dynamic and fascinating to watch in his pursuit, whatever he was doing, whether it was songwriting when he was working with a co-writer, or whether I was watching him in his art studio. Bob was passionate and obsessed and dedicated. And I'm not ever certain he ever really had, I mean, yes, he loved the idea he was successful. I mean, from a standpoint, certainly in the music business, I mean, we sat around all the time agonizing whether or not we have number one record this week or number 5 record this week or whatever it was. It was a thrilling time. And by the way, the record business in the days that we were really, really, really happening, which was the late 50s, 60s, and early 70s, was, from my point of view, the best period of music business. I would never be in the music business today. You couldn't pay me enough money to be in the music business today. But that being said, the wonderful thing about Bob is that he really embraced both his visual and his oral fascination with life. And he wrote what he saw. is the way I always interpret it. Bob was a master at interpreting what he was looking at, what he thought he wanted to see in a record. So that's a quickie explanation of how I became totally enveloped into this project.
Is it over to me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm maybe a bit of an odd duck in this because I was rather pleasantly dragooned into the project by Kathleen Rogers. Kathleen Rogers is an art person in Portland, involved in a lot of things. I worked through her in a couple of essays, and she asked me if I'd be interested. I didn't know Bob Crewe as an artist. I didn't even know him as a songwriter, although I knew the work. I knew the Four Seasons, I knew the songs, et cetera, et cetera. We have a couple coincidences here. I'll give you another one besides sharing a dealer for a while, a gallery, Jan Baum in Los Angeles. I had, for a long time, I was involved in Naranon because I had a loved one who was an addict. The meeting I went to was in St. Malachi's Church on, I think, 45th or 46th Street. It's the Actors Chapel. And always when I went there, for practically all the years I went, Jersey Boys was playing at the theater next door. You know, so I came by it all the time. Anyway, I came into this kind of clean, and I have to admit that I was a little bit skeptical. I said in the essay, there are pop music figures who have been in art, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to do something unforgivable here. I just want to read a couple of sentences out of the book, the thing that I wrote. And here it is. Although one might think that an art dealer would welcome someone into his or her roster who is independently wealthy and able to pitch in on the cost of mounting a show, and who brings a name up in lights reputation to the table, the opposite can be true. The downside is a worry that art worlders, who can be as smugly exclusionary as any country club coterie, will think the show is more about showbiz acquaintances being possible customers. The art world prefers the term clients than the quality of the art. And that's, you know, and I probably had a little bit of that skepticism, you know, when I came in. And so I came into it kind of clean. I came up to Portland. I was given access to the work. There was a wonderful session at the, you know, where the work, some of the work was taken out, shown it. I had reproductions. I had notebooks to take home. And in short, if you want it in 2 words, it was the real deal. Another thing, though, that Bob Crewe was up against, beside that, you know, is he just trading on his showbiz reputation, which he was not, was the timing. It was a kind of a, and I hadn't brought this up before in conversation, so I hope this isn't a big surprise. The timing was kind of odd, not Bob Crewe's fault. He was doing absolutely passionately sincere work, as sincere as, say, a Richard Serra or somebody like that, at a time when the art world and a lot of the art that got attention had gone ironic, you know, and it was a little like laughing up your sleeve. So he was a little bit out of, you know, out of phase in that way. But the work has a power. The best pieces have a power and a majesty to them. There's no doubt about it that somebody's pouring not only his soul, but a whole lot of know-how. You know, I'm an artist, and those things, a lot of things that, you know, physically that Bob Crewe did, I would be at a loss to try to, you know, tackle something like that. So all I can say is I came in cold and clean from the outside. I learned a lot, and I came away with an art critical admiration for somebody who was a very, very good artist.
Thank you. I came into the project because, again, because of Kathleen Rogers. I had curated an exhibition and did a book at the Museum of the City of New York called Gay Gotham, which looked at gay life in New York from the beginning of the 20th century to the 1990s. And I knew the kind of context, but like Peter, I didn't know the Bob Crewe story. And I found it fascinating how it dovetailed with what I had learned about gay life in New York in the 20th century. And so what I want to do now is I want to take you on a little tour. I want to sketch an arc of Bob Crewe's personal life as a gay man against the backdrop of changing perceptions and mores about gay people in America. I'm going to stop in the 1950s, early 60s. I'm going to spin forward to the mid 1970s. And then I'm going to move up to the present day and return us to this conversation about his depiction in Jersey Boys. But let's start with Bob Crewe in New York in the 50s. This is a period after World War II of tremendous homophobia for a variety of reasons. And it forces most gay men and lesbians into the so-called closet. For men like Bob Crewe and other members of the queer community, the best they could expect was to have their lives be an open secret to their friends and colleagues. They were unable to come out completely to the general public, and that's true of Bob Crewe. The open secret era shows itself in at least two ways in Bob Crewe's life. First, there is the great irony of the writer, a gay man, is writing Can't Take My Eyes Off You. And we'll talk about the genesis of that after we speak. He's writing one of the great romantic songs that when it's sung by a man is assumed to be given to a woman and vice versa. But in Bob Crewe's case, it was not the case. This puts him into very vaunted legacies of other gay writers who are doing the same thing, who are gay men who are writing straight love songs. It puts him in the context of Lawrence Hart, the great lyricist with Richard Rodgers, Cole Porter, and Billy Strayhorn, who worked with, what did he work with? Duke Ellington, who were all gay men. So the second aspect of Bob Crewe's life, that the open secret, is the way he presents himself and the way he is presented in the media. It's sadly total masquerade. He's in drag in a way, in that he appears in teen magazines as a clean-cut boy next door model who is seen romancing young women. It's a total fabrication, but he goes along with it as actors like Tab Hunter did at the same time. But in his personal life, Crewe is a bit different in that he embraces a queer social life, and his early career as a fashion model, a singer, and an artist are all supported by gay mentors, older men, within a very broad, rich gay community in New York City. Two people stand out. One was a man named Austin Avery Mitchell, who was older than Bob Crewe, who meets him in a gay bar on the east side of Manhattan, and with whom Bob Crewe travels to Rome, where he launches his singing career. And also it is through Mitchell, who Jessica mentioned, taking him to art museums. Bob Crewe says it is Mitchell who does this for him. So he's an art teacher. The other figure is a photographer named Otto Fenn, who is a fashion and portrait photographer who took dozens of photographs of Crewe for modeling and music assignments. Fenn was particularly close to Andy Warhol, and it's the Fenn-Warhol connection that results in Bob Crewe's paintings being exhibited at the Bodley Gallery. So both his singing career and his art career are due to an extended gay community and commonality. Now let's jump forward to Crewe's involvement with disco in the mid-70s. Disco, in many ways, has been inextricably linked with the era's great sexual explicitness, especially gay sexuality. Gay sexuality in the 70s is emerging. Remember, the Stonewall Uprising happens in 69. That's the start of the modern gay rights movement. And Bob Crewe is very much part of that in writing disco songs like From Lady Marmalade. But what's most ironic, once again, he finds himself as a betwixt and between figure. There's a story in the gay magazine, The Advocate, from 1976. It's openly gay magazine, very post-Stonewall. Bob Crewe is interviewed, and he talks about a record that he's just produced called Street Talk, and he mentions the goal of creating what he calls, I don't know what this could have been, what he calls the world's first trisexual rock ballet. For our purposes here, what's most interesting is you have to read between the lines in this openly gay magazine to get the point that he's gay. He's still, in 1976, unable to completely come out, even though the record is clearly gay overtones, and the hero of the song is the bisexual, almost alter ego of Bob Crewe. He still can't come out openly in this openly gay magazine. Finally, my last chapter, where Bob Crewe's closeted existence in the 50s and 60s comes full circle and in the way he's depicted in the 2005 Broadway musical Jersey Boys. He's credited as the show's lyricist. His role in the Four Seasons' success is downplayed, ceding most of the credit to Bob Gaudio. Even more galling to Bob Crewe was the play's depiction of him as the flaming queer. We've already heard about this. And there's a wonderful unpublished memoir that Bob Crewe reveals his thinking about this, how painful this was to him. And he says, and I quote, "I was the requisite fag for comic relief, as been the case in most every successful musical, but it's not at all like my closet itself." So 17 years later, as was pointed out in today's Variety, one wonders if it's possible to have put Jersey Boys on now with that requisite depiction, because Bob Crewe's depiction of him, the depiction of Bob Crewe is not accurate. He was never a flamboyant gay man. And I want to end with a great quote from this unpublished memoir that really gets to the heart of his sexual identity at the end of his life and suggests maybe, ultimately, he seems to have attained a kind of peace and acceptance. He says, quote, "I am what and who I am. I'm not butch or swish. Rather, I think of myself as a celebrated gentleman of personal choice, choosing what works and what does not work in the arena of life, in my life in particular." Thank you.
Beautiful.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you all. What a thoughtful start to our discussion. I would like to start us by going back to the 1950s, when it sounds like, and Dan, you're gonna have to help us here. It sounds like he is really getting his feet under him in terms of the music industry. He's modeling and he's making art. What's his life like?
Well, I have to say, let's talk about the roads divided. So my brother left Belleville, New Jersey for New York City right after graduation from high school and went to Parsons. And I'm only 4 years behind him, you realize. And then I'm graduating from high school and I'm wind up being passing the exams and what have you and go to the United States Naval Academy. Now, our worlds could not have diverted any greater. There's no such thing as being any further apart than my being at the United States Naval Academy and my brother being in the gay bars of, with his penny loafers and Brooks Brothers outfit, in the bird circuit of New York City in the 50s, of which I didn't participate, but I knew about. because whenever I was able to go into New York eventually on leave, I would visit my brother, and I would, although he didn't know I was gay, ironically, I knew he was gay, but I would wind up visiting the bird shops, so to speak. In any case, I knew very little about what was going on in that 50s period with Bob. I knew the turmoil, sort of the on-off switches that were going on between having a record, producing a record, still involved with doing art and doing things in that vein, but he was modeling at the same time, and he was having great success. In fact, I was in the class in 1957 at the Naval Academy, and I came back from winter break, 2 weeks of vacation leave, and on the billboards, gigantic billboards for Coca-Cola, was my brother with a 1957 shirt on. It's a very famous ad by Coca-Cola, and he's there with two lovely girls and holding up his Coca-Cola, and we looked a lot alike. I didn't quite look as beautiful as he, but we if you didn't have us together at the same time, you would know immediately that we were brothers. In any case, my classmates thought I had done a Coca-Cola ad. So that was Bob's life. Coca-Cola ad, starting things with the record, doing things with music. I remember he had a record coming out at about that time, and I can't remember what it was exactly, but having your hands around Bob Crewe in the 50s would have been a slippery job, because he was everywhere. He was doing everything, and he was, but you know something, when you look at it in with a little perspective, it was all the same thing. You know, it came out in different media, in different areas, but his music, his art, his fashion, his desire to be a singer and a performer, all those things were interrelated. And I don't, quite honestly, I just thought he was, well, actually, I thought he was very weird, but I really thought he was also incredibly talented. I mean, he was startlingly talented. And, but I didn't spend a lot of time. I didn't see him very much. It wasn't until after I graduated and actually finished my military career that I really got to know Bob as an adult.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What was that friendship? And maybe Donald, you may want to jump in here. That friendship with Andy Warhol, like, and
yeah, well, that was through Otto.
That was through Otto Fenn. Yeah. Otto Fenn. Actually, the modeling career starts with Otto Fenn.
Yes.
Because he's working for a modeling agency, and he starts to photograph Bob Crewe. And Otto Fenn oftentimes would photograph himself in drag, and Andy Warhol was in the studio and would draw. There are Andy Warhol drawings of men in drag. Those men are oftentimes Otto Fenn.
Oh, interesting.
And so there was this, and in many ways, Fenn's salon was where you met everybody, straight and gay. And it's almost like a model for the factory that Warhol does in the 60s. And Bob Crewe is quoted as saying, Andy Warhol thought my work was edgy, and he promotes it with the Bodley Gallery, which was 1960. So it's a kind of, it seems to me that gay men and lesbians at that time needed solidarity among themselves. And out of that solidarity comes a great sense of collaboration. And that solidarity was necessary because they were fighting against the mainstream norms.
The interesting aside in the book, there's a copy of a Christmas card that Bob Crewe and Frank Slay created to send out to friends and what have you. And Frank was this co-writer in the earliest days. They wrote Silhouettes and a few other really very important songs. And the set is it's all drawn set, and Bob is like leaning on a piano and whatever. But the set was drawn by Andy Warhol.
Yes.
So
This
that's
is the Warhol of the drawings of the boy books and those. It's the Warhol pre-pop art.
right.
Could I ask a question for Donald?
Yes.
The 50s, you know, being gay in England was against the law.
Right.
And in the United States, you had a blacklist, which I have kind of been studying my whole life, the blacklist. And one of my colleagues at Variety had pointed out to me some years ago, the anti-gay component of the blacklist, it's almost a gay blacklist as much as it's a communist blacklist.
Yes, right.
Donald, could you describe how that might have contributed to the closet was a serious thing for business reasons and beyond just social or religious or something?
Right. It was, you had to be very careful. I mean, Eisenhower says that you can be fired if you're openly gay in the military and the federal government. And that happens in 52. So men like Leonard Bernstein, who embody queer lifestyle as we know it today, who has a passionate relationship with a woman and has children, but is also very sexually drawn to men, has to be extremely careful that his career is not ruined. It must have been really dreadful. It was as bad as being a communist.
Yes, yeah, thank you.
In the era.
Yeah.
Well, just to add a
Right,
note,
it's illegal.
I graduated in 1957. I was an officer in the Air Force, and I was absolutely terrorized by anyone ever finding out I was gay, because I would wind up in the brig, and I would be dishonorably discharged, and I would be in the brig if they could prove that I had an actual sexual relationship. But just being known as gay would mean I'd be thrown out, and I'd be dishonorably discharged. So nobody who was gay in the 50s and 60s had any security, whether it was in corporate world or in the military world.
Mm-hmm.
But there are various gay and lesbian organizations that are fighting against it. So that in many ways, Stonewall is not the beginning of something. It's the link between the Mattachine Society and the Daughters of Bilitis. There are very brave people who picket and fight against it, but it ultimately leads to the Stonewall uprising. But they're very brave in doing what they do.
I think one of the most amazing things about this book is that it takes a figure that I think a lot of us I think about in the public and makes him vastly more complicated through this incredible story of him being a gay man working his way through a very heteronormative culture in the mid-century, as well as being, somebody who's moving back and forth really between visual art and music. And one of the amazing kind of threads of our conversation that I want us to turn to now, that we previewed for ourselves in our preparatory meeting, was really about Bob's shifting back and forth between making art in a visual realm and participating in the music business, writing songs. Dan, I know that you were integral to him moving in the 1980s from his musical career to really dedicating himself to fine art. I'd love to talk about that and bring Peter in also to talk about kind of this immersion in his painting practice in the 1990s.
Well, let me try to show the linear transition, because you have to understand when we were in business together, and then we broke up for several reasons, not the least of which was addiction, which took Bob right down to the pits and really nearly wiped him out physically. So he was riding on a lying ship for close to 10 years. And when we split, it was the beginning of the end. Within a year and a half after we split, he had taken our company, and I walked away, and he had taken the company and wound up going into bankruptcy. So, but it was in parallel to his addiction, which was growing and growing, and it was getting worse and worse, and it progressed to the point where finally in 1976, he got sober. From 76 until 82, he tried, desperately tried to get back into really doing good music and recapturing that flame. And it really was escaping him constantly. And he finally got fed up. And we had this incredible conversation. I remember exactly when it was before my second child was born. It was like 82, 83. And he was desperate. And I said, Bob, you know, you don't have to be, you know, you're wealthy enough, you know, from all his royalties and residuals. You can do anything you want. And he hated the idea of having, he couldn't even stand Billboard. He wouldn't even read Billboard anymore. So I said, why don't you just quit and do what you want to do? What would that be? And he said, well, I would paint, of course. I said, well, why don't you paint? And well, of course, with Bob's way he did everything, he didn't do it in small steps. He went right for it, right? He got his studio set up. He had an agent set up. He had a PR person, and he was traveling to Europe, looking at different galleries, trying to get representation. I mean, he was into it, but his productivity just started to, I mean, he was just unbelievable in his focus and what he was trying to do. However, you know, it was, he was 76, it was in 1982. So Bob is, what is he?
He's 62.
He's almost 60 years old when he's really starting to get back into the music, into the world of art. But man, he goes for it all the way. And that was it. He wasn't doing music anymore. He was just an artist. And but he was still, you know, his attitude was he was trying to have a #1 painting. You know, it was like he's trying to have a hit record. His pursuit. It wasn't like this is where he was going, you know, and he couldn't understand. He was, whining and dining people at LACMA in LA, and they all were coming to his house all the time, and he was donating money to LACMA, and he figured, well, you know, this is going to be my key to the door, you know, the whatever. In any case, that's how the transition took place. During that period of time, he then went through several phases, as you could probably describe, Peter, from the early 80s, you know, until the 2000s. He was painting and doing different series that you can very easily identify.
Your mic is off. You're going to ask me something.
Well, yeah.
Okay, here's a thing about, and I don't want to be whiny about this, but here's a thing about visual art as opposed to music, popular songs with lyrics to them that tell a story. There are anecdotes there. It fits better with a story. There is nothing more boring, and I, encountered this problem in writing about art. There's nothing more boring than a lot of words about a static object. I mean, this is an old kind of thing where I think it's, my art history is fading here. I think it's Lessing's Laocoon. I'm not sure. But there's the trying to describe the beauty of Helen of Troy, and you can't do it. You can't describe the eyes and the nose and the hair and the figure, et cetera, et cetera. So what the poet does, what Homer does, is describe the reaction of the people in the street as she walks by. You know, they fall down. Okay, so if you want to write anything inert, you would take a Bob Crewe painting, a construction, one of those things, and analyze it formally and talk about the shapes and the colors and the et cetera, et cetera. However, and this may be a lack on my part, there is a bit of a thing about abstract art. And this isn't de Kooning's semi-abstraction. This is full-bore abstraction in most of the case, where, as they say in lit theory, you know, the text is the text, which is to say, in a lot of those things, they're just really good. You can see the passion in them, you can see the formal qualities in them, et cetera, et cetera. But to me, you're not going to ferret out a narrative of Bob Crewe's life in those things. Does that make sense? And what I'm saying is it's still really, really good stuff. You know, I don't know whether you need to know the bio when you see it on the wall or on the floor.
Mm-hmm. Although you made the point earlier that it was really, really good stuff that was more sincere than its moment in the 1990s. And I think that probably contributed to him having a hard time really breaking out and getting that, you know, the art world doesn't measure things quite exactly the same way the music world does. But that kind of breakout hit, that moment of fame, was probably ill-timed.
Yeah, I mean, it was a lack of a better term, it was a kind of a smart-ass era in the art world. Things were ironic, they were subversive, they were comic. And unlike, say, I'll take a gay, very well-known artist, Jasper Johns. You can decode those things. There are little bits of imagery, et cetera, et cetera. But Bob Crewe's art, the really monumental stuff, and I say monumental not just necessarily in size, you know, they're not illustrative. They're just there. And you can tell, like you said, you can tell they're passionate and they're sincere, and he pours everything he can into them. But I don't think they're biographically narrative.
Yeah, and I think that's where I'd like for us
Maybe
to
that was a relief to him.
Yeah. They're interestingly also because these abstract paintings, they're not actually lighthearted. There's a kind of passion and even at the level of color, kind of intensity and sobriety to them, which, you know, clearly here has a double valence. But they're the exact opposite. Steve, you used the word the vignettes. The songs as vignettes. These paintings do not partake of the vignette model. And so I'd like for you all to think about whether there are real connections between the visual art and the music, or whether they feel quite divorced.
Can I jump in? Dan, you said something that I quoted today, that there is a connectivity that's very real for you, and I thought you were incredibly articulate about it. There was something missing for Bob, and the work has a power, and I think you use powerful and strength. There is something strong there that he could express in the work, and that's where the art, the visual art, expressed this side of himself, where the other music art expressed a completely different side of himself. Maybe that those vignettes of, you know, kind of heterosexual fantasies, maybe that was another kind of, you know, wouldn't it be nice, you know, a kind of a retreat there. But these do have a strength to them that was something that he was expressing, that came from the soul, you know. That's it's an interesting observation, I thought.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, Dan, you've talked about how your brother spoke to other musicians in visual terms.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
how he talked about colors and imagery.
Right.
And that could be a very strong link between the music and the art, that the music is visualized.
Well, I mean, even Jersey Boys, I mean, there's a line in Jersey Boys where Bob is in the studio. The person they're depicting is Bob Crewe, is in the studio asking the musician, saying to the musician, I want to hear clouds. Well, that would be an exact kind of phrase Bob would use when he was trying to describe something he wanted to hear. He would do it visually. He would talk about the color that he wanted. He would actually pick the color. I want to hear purple here. Right? That's how he would repeat. And his musicians that he worked with a lot, he used the same ones a lot because they got to understand this man who was not a musician. Yep. Let's start with that, by the way. He wasn't a trained musician. He couldn't read music. He could sing it. He could write the lyrics. He wrote poetry, and he wrote beautiful lyrics. And sometimes I would say, where the hell does this come from with this guy? I don't feel this doesn't. There was no connect for me. It was like he's saying things that he doesn't live, but he lives it. But he can't live. He lives it in his head, but he can't live it in his life. So the kind of things he writes are beautiful, and some of them are just ethereal. And I never could quite figure out the process. But he painted. I think his paintings were very sexual. I think for him it was very physical. I mean, watching it, there's a picture right on the cover of this book. That's not a posed picture. That's somebody capturing him because he doesn't even know you're there. I mean, because I would visit him in the studio and I would finally leave. It was so boring to be in there because he was obsessed with whatever he was doing. Yeah, that's it. Look at the face on him. It's almost diabolical.
I have a question for Peter. Because I'm really fascinated. I remember the period you're talking about so well, although I'm not really in the art world. I'm sort of next to it, watching it. What followed the smartass era? If we look at the 80s and 90s, and is the sincerity? You mentioned Richard Serra. I thought that was a fantastic parallel to Bob. But where are we? If the 90s was smartass, what followed smartass?
In a short word, identity politics.
Okay.
It was foregrounded. Some of it is sexual identity. Artists are gay and straight, but it was more racial and ethnic. Black artists, Chicano artists, Latinx artists, et cetera, the untold story, people who were left out of the art world because it was a nice, basically white upper middle class and upper class enterprise because those were the people who could afford to buy this stuff. I mean, one of the things that's different about the pop music biz is that, something like a Four Seasons song is going to sell a zillion copies at pennies a piece, or be played like that, whereas an artist, and Bob Crewe didn't make a whole lot of prints. His works were unique, one of a kind paintings. Those things are usually sold to wealthy people for a fairly high price, even moderately priced ones. I mean, $10,000, $12,000 is nothing for a genuine painting in a serious gallery. So you're talking about two different kinds of systems here. But to go back to the question you asked, I would say, yeah, it's identity politics, basically. I mean, I don't want to be an old reactionary, but one of the things that bothers me about the art world is it's more about who the artist is than what the art looks like.
Yeah.
And basically, that's what it is now.
Yeah.
I mean, that's oversimplified as all
No,
discussions.
I really appreciate that, because I was thinking during the period there were some painters I admired who were sincere, and they were completely out of step with what was going on. And it's almost like the socialist realism of the 30s could not have been more out of touch in the 80s and 90s. But what replaced the irony of the 80s and 90s is almost like a version of the socialist realism, if you know, to speak
Yeah, well,
from
our
a
world
layman's
is a
point of
very
view.
multifarious place. So there's an audience and a business and a coterie of collectors and shows for, you know, most any style. But you were asking which one would be up there with plurality, and I would say identity politics and social content art.
Yeah.
Abstract art is not very big right now.
Right,
And
gotcha.
it's an interesting challenge to be introducing this artist. We just have a couple more minutes. I see Maggie's joining us again.
Hi.
Can I
You have a
share this
question?
question from the audience? Or
Yes.
is that okay? We have a fabulous question from the audience, which I think is really important. Can anyone speak to the struggles or inspirations Bob found in writing music, particularly love songs, in such a heteronormative time in history?
Could you repeat that? I didn't quite get it.
Sure. Can anyone speak to the struggles or inspirations Bob found in writing music, particularly love songs, in such a heteronormative time in history? And I think maybe actually the story of Can't Take My Eyes Off of You would be a great response, actually.
Well, it's exactly what Donald was talking about earlier. The fact is, my brother came to the office one day and he said, "I wrote this song, the lyric. He has to talk to Gaudio because they have to work together at the piano. But he had the song completely written that he'd gotten up that morning, and his boyfriend, who was still in bed, and he could see where his desk was. He could see the bed, and he could see his boyfriend in bed, and his ass was bare. You know, whatever. So he's looking at his boyfriend's ass, and all of a sudden, it's as if somebody was dictating. He said, he got, "Can't take my arse off of you. You're too good to be true. You're like heaven on earth." You know, and it was just, he said, "I wrote it in 5 minutes." It was just, and I heard the melody. That was the other part of it. He knew what he wanted in the song. He already knew what the song was going to be. And then he called up Gaudio, and that's how that song came to be. Now, he did not tell anybody that it was Billy's ass.
Yeah, you wonder about how many Italian crooners at dinners that were singing the song. How many of them stood up and said, "You know, Bob Crewe wrote this song." Didn't happen. I don't think.
Wedding songs of all time, by the way.
Yeah.
It has become de rigueur in every wedding and every Italian wedding to boot.
I mean, there's a
1 minute.
there's a spectrum. So someone like Lawrence Hart, it's been argued the longing quality of the lyrics is oftentimes a reflection of the longing that he couldn't fulfill as a closeted gay man.
Yeah.
Right.
Whereas Cole Porter puts in puns and gay jokes because he could get away with it. So each of these men relates to their gayness in different ways.
Right.
That's so interesting. I'm going to jump in with one last question because we only have 1 minute, and it's another good one. Sarah McMullen asks, "How did the relationship with Andrew Oldham come about?"
Oh, it was a great situation. Andrew came to our office one day in very early years of his relationship with the Rolling Stones. He came to the U.S. He came up to see us. We were famous, you know. So we started a relationship, conversational relationship. It turned out that he wanted to make a deal with us if we would, and we wound up making a publishing deal for the Rolling Stones. Now, the Rolling Stones really didn't mean anything at that moment. They hadn't happened in the United States, and we made a deal. We formed a company with Andrew, and before you know it, we had Can't Get No Satisfaction, etc. And as years go by, And but there's more to the story.
You got 15 seconds.
Okay, well, what happened was Mick turned 21 and he disavowed his contract with Andrew. Andrew, in order to be able to re-sign and Mick, the Mick of the Rolling Stones, had to come to us and beg us to sell him back the company that we formed with him so that he could make a deal with Mick so he could keep the Rolling Stones. I bought my first house with that deal, and I thought it was a wonderful deal. Had I kept it, I would have had satisfaction. And we all know that was not a good deal, but it was a great deal
For you at the time. That's so great. I want to thank you all so much. I want to thank Maggie and the team at Book Soup for hosting us. Thanks to Kathleen for bringing so many people together, and to Rizzoli Electa for publishing this fabulous book.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap on our presentation. Thank you to our guests and to all of you who tuned in this evening. We greatly appreciate everyone's time and your support of independent bookstores. Support our bookstore and our authors and purchase a copy of tonight's featured book. Just click the green purchase button that reads Bob Crewe directly below the viewer screen. If you'd like regular updates on our upcoming events, make sure to follow us on Crowdcast and subscribe to our newsletter. Have a great evening, everyone, and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Good night.
Good
Thank
night,
you. Thank
everybody.
you, Maggie.
Take
Thanks,
care.
everyone.